Good morning. On behalf of the ISO, I'd like to welcome you to the draft 2025 Flexible Capacity Needs and Availability Assessment Hours Technical Study for 2026 through 2028 stakeholder call. And the draft assessment was posted last week on 4/25. My name is Elena Kopolov-Alford, representing ISO Stakeholder Affairs, and I'll be facilitating the web conference today. I'm joined by Clyde Lutan, Principal Renewable Energy Integration, Hong Zhu, Lead Market Development Analyst, Short-Term Forecasting, Tobias Deckel, Forecast Model Analyst, and we also have Amber Motley and some others here joining us as well. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know where you can find these materials. They are on the Flexible Capacity Needs Assessment 2026 process page. You can get to that page by going to CAISO.com, navigating to the Stakeholder Center tab at the top, selecting recurring processes, and that'll take you to that landing page where you can navigate to the specific one, and the latest documents will be at the very top. So some housekeeping reminders before we get started. This call is being recorded for informational and convenience purposes only. Any related transcription should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. The meeting is structured to stimulate dialogue and engage different perspectives, but please keep your comments professional and respectful. And please try and be brief and refrain from repeating what's already been said so we can manage our time efficiently this morning. To raise your hand, make sure you open the chat and participant panels from the bottom right of WebEx. And the raise hand icon is located at the bottom of the participant panel. If you dialed in outside of the WebEx, you can press *3 to get into the question queue. And please remember to state your name and affiliation before making your comments or asking your question. If you'd like to send a question in the chat, please send it to all panelists. If you need technical assistance during the meeting, you can send a chat to the event producer at Intelor Events. Today's event producer is Ahmed. So our objective today is to discuss the assumptions, methodology, and draft results of the monthly flexible capacity requirement and availability assessment hours technical study, specifically calculating monthly flexible capacity requirements for all LRAs within the ISO footprint for RA compliance year 2026. And advisory requirements for compliance years 2027 and 2028. For our agenda for today, we're going to go over some background of this process and then the process review, and then go through the overview of the methodology used for the system and local availability assessment hours for 2026, and then the draft for 2027 and 2028. And here I'm going to hand it over to Clyde Lutan.
Good morning, and thanks, Elena. So, most of you were on the call last year, previous year, so familiar with this topic. This first slide here really shows you some of the changes the CPUC made when this effort started way back in 2004 for flexible capacity. And this stemmed from 2001, when we had 8 days we curtail formulas, and then PUC stepped in and they developed the framework for resource adequacy. And then the two biggest changes was like in 2007, where local capacity became a component of resource adequacy. And then in 2015, flexible capacity became a component of resource adequacy. So in California, our resource adequacy has 3 pieces: meeting the peak, local capacity, and flexible capacity. Now, I know I have a slide back. I think it's either the second to last slide or last, but I bring that up now. Last year, NERC developed a new operating standard. It's called BAL 007, and it's looking at short-term. The gist of that whole standard is, can an entity, because what NERC noticed over the years is balancing authorities in North America, they were able to meet the peak capacity for the month or the peak capacity for the day, but they were not meeting the energy needs every hour towards that peak. So that standard was approved by NERC Board of Governors last year. It's going to be implemented next year. And internally at the ISO, we're looking at a small team that's going to look at how do we study this. And the ISO, we think so far, the few discussions we had, we think we're going to be looking at 5 days, or I think it's either 7 or 5 days out, because the forecast, even though it's short term for load, wind, solar, rooftop PV, is not accurate beyond 7 days. So we told NERC that we're going to cut this off at 7 days. And the intent here is if we identify any problems within every hour for the next 7 days, we have to report that to the RC, the reliability coordinator for, in our case, the West. And then the RC is going to tell us if he needs us to do additional work, or how do we mitigate any potential problems that we see. So again, flexible capacity is important, and now with this new standard, it's even more important. Next slide, please. So resource adequacy, and most of you are familiar with the framework. Year ahead, again, is 90% of the next year monthly needs. Month ahead, load serving entities, they need to make sure they meet the net qualifying capacity, plus a plan reserve margin, and the contingency reserve required. And again, we stress this. One of the biggest concerns we have is during the 3-hour ramp. If we have a contingency, we got to meet that ramp in addition to recovering from that contingency within 15 minutes, right? So during the ramps, when we run our market model, we make sure we have 2 ramping needs, one with a 10-minute ramp, and the other one here is covering the 3-hour ramp. So that way we would ensure we have the capability to recover from a contingency should it happen during the 3-hour ramp. So here, all resource participating in the ISO market, they must have an RA contract and must have obligation, and they have to submit economic bids in the ISO market. That kind of ensures us that we have the capacity and now the flexibility that we need to control the grid. Next slide, please. So when we started this, we typically send surveys out in December to load serving entities. We ask for a lot of information, and then we use the CEC's IPA forecast. And in this case, we're looking at 2026, which is the binding year, and then 27 through 28, which is advisory. So we kind of build the net load. To build the net load, we need to know things like load, wind, solar, and this CC, what they do is they incorporate a lot of stuff in the managed net load forecast, like electric vehicles, AAH, you name it, they put in there. So we get an hourly forecast from the CC, and that's what we use for this analysis, right? When we send the surveys out to load serving entities, we ask the resource makeup, so like solar thermal, PV tracking, non-tracking, external resources. We ask for, are they going to be dynamically scheduled into the ISO or not? Because we need that information to calculate the expected flexibility that we would need to meet or to maintain reliability in the system. Next slide, please. So based on the information we collected, we broke this out like into hybrids. For the hybrid, you can see it's not a lot. We're looking at 2026, less than 2,000 megawatts, right? A big portion of that, well, again, less than 1,000 megawatts is batteries. And then we got PV tracking in this case and PV fixed. No wind were identified as hybrids from the information we got. So again, looking at 28, 29, we're looking at probably 5,000 megawatts of hybrid expected to be connected to the ISO's grid Next slide, please. Then we did the same thing with co-located, and co-located is quite a bit. So you can see in 2026 timeframe, we're going to be jumping from a little over 4,000 megawatts of batteries to pretty close to 6,000 megawatts. And we got a lot of PV tracking. So those of you not really familiar, PV tracking is worse in terms of ramp than just PV fixed. Right? So PV tracking move with the sun, and the variability, increases. We need to make sure that we can, again, meet the ramping needs. So if you look at the co-located 2026, including batteries, you're looking at about 14,000 megawatts. So that's quite a bit of co-located. And so we break these out. We do include hybrids, co-located, dynamics in the analysis, and we can get into details. I go to like 2 more slides and then stop for questions. So slide 11. So slide 11 shows you the information we got from the load 7 entities in terms of capacity. And in 2026 timeframe, you're looking at roughly 19,000 megawatts in rooftop PV in terms of capacity. And then the forecast that we got from the CEC for 26, and again, this is the max that we would expect, is 15,180. So the maximum that we'd expect to see in 2026 in terms of actual production, in this case, is 15,180 megawatts. Next slide, and then we pause, Elena. Next slide shows you a breakdown. So we looked at everything that we had existed on the system in 2024 timeframe, and then we broke out the solar thermal, the wind, co-located, wind and solar hybrids, and everything else, and then expected in 25, and then expected in 26, which is the last column, is what we need to look at. Looking at the green with this slide, and then the green, and not the LSC's projection for rooftop PV and the CC's projection, I think we need to make a slight correction on that. Those 2 slides, the numbers are slightly different, so we're going to correct that before we send these slides, or we develop the final set of slides. So with that, I'm going to pause here for a second and see if there are any questions on the first 12 slides.
There are no questions in the chat and no hands in the queue.
Okay, so let's move on to slide 13. So slide 13, I'm just going to get to the gist of the whole thing. We used the most recent year, and in this case, it was 2024. So we start off with 1 minute load 1 minute data for load wind solar. And we developed the net load. We did a couple of things a little different this year just to see if the ramp's going to change significantly. It did not. So we looked at the net load profiles for 26 through 28, and in order to do that, you look at load, as I said, wind and solar. Now, since we have so much wind and solar, we could do a scale because there's so much. We simply scale based on capacity or expected capacity for the future years. So when we ask the load 7 entities to submit their data, we ask them, give us the best estimate as to when you'd expect your wind and solar by month to come in, and we use that information to calculate net load. And net load is what we dispatch to today, except, like the batteries, they bid into the market, and the market would optimize the battery, the bidding profile, same thing with pumps. But essentially, we developed the net load to do this analysis. Slide 14. So slide 14, this is what we use from the CECs. 1 and 2 hyper forecast. It's the very last row there that says manage net load. So that's what we use for this analysis. So we take that CC's manage net load, which incorporates, as I said, things like EVs, pumping, everything that the CC thinks that's going to be or materialize, and we use that as the managed net load to project the expected ramping needs in the future years. Right? So I'm going to move to the next slide, probably next 2 to 3 slides, and then we can pause for questions. Now, this slide here, a lot of you are familiar with it. What we do is we take the CEC's forecast. So the blue line on the top left, that's the CEC's hourly forecast, right? So we do use the CEC's hourly forecast, load forecast, that is. And then this year we did 2 things. One, the green was the ISO's actual load. So moving from the top left to the top right, we take the hourly. So we average the hourly minute-by-minute data for the load. And then we look at the CC's forecast and the and the ISO's actual load. And then this year, we decided to also look at the ISO's load, and then we subtracted the batteries and the pump loads just to see if that would make a difference, because that closely aligns with the CC's forecast that does not contain batteries and does not have our curtailments. And again, to make a long story short, we look at those values. I think 2 or 3 slides down, you'd see it did not make much of a difference because we're looking at ways to modify the way we do flexible capacity moving forward. So again, when you look at the difference, the hourly difference between step 1, which is the CC's hourly forecast, the ISO's hourly forecast, and again, we did that 2 ways. So we have an ISO actual and an ISO actual minus pumps and batteries. And then that orange, that's not orange, that's, what color is that? Purple. That shows you the difference. But because the scale is so big, it looks like a straight line. So then step 2 shows you that purple curve by hour, and then what the short-term forecasting team does is they run that through a smoothing routine, which is that orange. So then we look at the orange minute-by-minute data to smoothen the CEC's hourly forecast, right? So one more slide, and then I'm going to pause there for questions. So essentially, we are using the CEC's hourly forecast currently to calculate the flexible capacity needs. So next slide, please, Yelena. Right, and then slide 16, all this does here, it shows you mathematical representation of the previous slide, which is that X is that purple line that we saw. We smoothed that out, and then we just showed here for 2026, we take the actual 2024, and then we add every minute what that we got from that smoothing routine to develop a minute-by-minute 2026 load and 2027 load to do this calculation. Let me go to one more slide and then we pause. Slide 17. Let me go back to the previous one. So are there any questions or hands raised, Elena, on the first 16 slides?
No, there are no hands in the queue.
Okay, so slide 17. Slide 17, what we did here is we showed, we picked April 20th, and the reason why I picked that, this was the day we saw the maximum 3-hour ramp. So I just wanted to get a feel as to, well, how does curtailment and batteries fit in? So the net load, which is that red curve, the solid red, is what we actually saw in the system on April 20th. But when you added back the curtailment, so the green dotted lines The green dotted line is the batteries, and then this green solid line is really the curtailments. So when you add those two back into this whole framework, you see that red dotted line is what the ramp would have been if we had no curtailments or no batteries. And the reason why we wanted to show this is looking in 2026 timeframe, 27 timeframe, it's very, very difficult to guesstimate, batteries charging, all curtailments. So we do that calculation showing, well, this is what the ramp would be if we had no curtailments or no batteries, right? So again, when you look at the numbers in 2026, 2027, 2028, this is what the system would expect to see, and this includes also dynamics, right, when we do this calculation. In real time, the dynamics, even though in one of those slides we showed a little over 1,000 megawatts coming in as dynamic schedules, and the ISO must maintain flexibility to mitigate the variability for dynamics. But even though it's 1,000, we may not see 1,000 in real time. So that piece there is very difficult to determine what the dynamics are going to play or what part they're going to play in real time. So those are some subjective pieces that we're going to take a second look at this year to see what it is we need to change or how we need to modify flexible capacity moving forward. Next slide, please. So next slide here is what we showed where battery is going to be increasing drastically. So batteries do have an impact on the flexible capacity needs. So this slide really tells you, well, as battery increases, more batteries are going to be charging during the middle of the day, but and that decreases the ramp. But it's very difficult today to predict because remember the batteries, they also bid in a state of charge, right? So it's difficult, again, 2 years prior to predict what the battery is actually going to be doing in real time, right? But the gist to this slide is to show that ramp is increasing as batteries increases. Now, one more slide. I think the other one is showing the impact on curtailments, if I'm correct. Next slide, please. This one shows the EFC. This is one area, we have to do some additional work this year. This shows you, if you strictly look at EFCs at the very bottom, it shows you we got almost 50,000 megawatts of flexibility based on the way we do EFCs today. Well, we need to really take a second look because this includes anything that can move. So if you could ramp 2 megawatts a minute, or you could ramp 100 megawatts a minute, you get credited with EFC. I'm going to show you a few slides down. The ramping needs down in 3 hours. We need really fast moving units. So in the gas fleet, off the top, what's included in that is the jet turbines that we got, almost 9,000 megawatts. So when we do this revision, we're going to have to take that out. Those of you familiar how hydro works in the West, during the spring months, we do not have a lot of hydro to rely on flexibility. Today, we do not have a market product that differentiates between slow-moving units and fast-moving units. So if you could move, as I said, 2 megawatts a minute or 100 megawatts a minute, you meet the flexible capacity requirement, even though the slow units really cannot help you. So batteries, again, we do credit batteries based on the capacity, if they're bidding into the regulation market or not. To the right there, we got a little blurb that tells you it's 3 hours or 15 minutes if they're bidding into the regulation market or not. During the 3-hour ramps, today they get credited from PMIN to PMAX. We need to look at that holistically from the ISO's perspective to see how much, when do we really charge? We know when we charge, but do we see the need to recalculate EFCs during the ramp and during the middle of the day? The reason why I said that is in some hours in our system, our net load varies by plus or minus 1,000 to plus or minus 2,000 megawatts in 10 minutes. That's a lot of variability. Predicting that variability is a challenge. So we look at across the board what it is we need to do to modify or to make sure we have the correct resources provided and flexibility. So we're not only looking at how can we modify the flexible capacity requirement, because as I mentioned in slide 6, I think it was, the PUC already made flexible capacity a component of resource adequacy. So we need to make sure that what we credit for EFC to meet the ramps, they can actually meet the ramps. So we're going to be taking a second look at the total EFC that we have. And who knows, it may be different during the middle of the day where we can credit batteries from PMIN to PMAX. It could be different from the 3-hour evening ramps where it may be 0 to PMAX. I'm not sure, but it's something we plan on taking a closer look at. Next slide, please. This one here shows the draft results for 2025. And then I think I mentioned this in 2 or 3 slides before. We looked at 2 different ways of calculating the ramps, one with the ISO's actual load, and then one with the ISO's actual load, and then we subtracted battery charging on pump loads. And you can see the last 2 bars, which is the orange and the yellow, they're practically the same, right? So we didn't see much of a difference. I think the main reason is during the 3-hour ramps, very rare we may see battery charging. I could remember offhand we did it a couple of times in the past, only because we were anticipating a deficiency in energy at the net load peak. But typically, when we see the maximum 3-hour ramp is on a weekend, and we're looking at, again, that's not when you see battery charging or curtailments, right? That's when the solar is actually dropping off. So those 2 are practically the same, but it shows you here the actual ramps and then the progression if we had no renewables or no curtailments. So again, this is another way of showing the slides with the curves. And one more slide, slide 20, and then we pause. Slide 20 shows you curtailments. So the curtailments that we see is increasing, as you can see, and curtailments has an impact on the 3-hour ramps, right? Now, these are the 2 things we focused on, right? Curtailments and batteries. But again, moving forward, there are a lot of different things that we need to look at from an ISO's perspective, right? So we got like about 10 different things that my boss had asked me to look at. And we think in addition to batteries, in addition to curtailments, the Western imbalanced energy market is going to help or reduce curtailments. It's going to help us reduce the ramps. By how much? It's really difficult to say right now, but we know it's going to help. The extended day-ahead market, that's going to also help. So in addition to curtailments, batteries, these 2 things here, we know that's going to help. So the extended day-ahead market is really if external entity, if they know they can rely on, let's say, cheap energy from the ISO tomorrow, they can plan their commitment day ahead to incorporate that energy from the ISO. Today, it's really difficult to do that. If we call a neighbor B and say, hey guys, we got 2,000 megawatts of free energy, they can't use it because we got 5 existing node standards that if you fail one of those, they come with hefty fines. And when they commit the resources in the day-ahead time frame, they make sure they have enough flexibility to meet the expected variability. So no BA in real time is going to shut their units down and take free energy from the ISO. So The extended day-ahead market is going to help. It's going to help, as I said, if I know I'm going to get cheap energy externally, then I can plan my system around that. So all of these are going to have an impact. One of the other things that we did recommend to the PUC a while back was a super off-peak rate, which is every month, and I think except July and August, from 10 a.m. to 1600, we would like to see a super off-peak rate where we'd incentivize everybody to use a lot of electricity to raise the value of the DAC. So we're still trying to push that to the PUC. We have recommended 4 time of use rates. The PUC only recommended the 4 to 9, which is the peak, but we would like to see them recommend that off-peak to help raise the value of DAC. With that, we're also looking at changing the group on the frequency deadband on, right now we're thinking inverter-based resources, but we may decide to go with all resources, and that's going to help with the system responding faster to the variability. And as I said, you know, it's varying quite a bit. For those of you who are familiar with the way the system works, we control the grid every 4 seconds. Every 5 minutes through the market, every 4 seconds through regulation. Well, the standards that we use today, and some of you could go back and check, is called NUC BAL001. That standard was developed in 2004, and I happen to be part of that NUC work group that developed that standard. And that standard was developed for controllable supply and predictable demand. Today, we got almost over 40,000 megawatts of renewable. We still operate into that same standard. So we have been, you know, up to NUC, we need to change that standard because today we got variable supply, unpredictable demand. We got, you know, about 15,000 megawatts, in some cases anywhere from 10 to 15,000 megawatts of rooftop PV production. You have no visibility. You do have a 5-minute forecast, expected forecast, but NUC benchmarks balancing authority in North America every minute. So every minute we got to do a calculation and say, did we support the interconnection frequency or did we lean on the interconnection? So this is something, you know, even though we get a 5-minute forecast, and I'm not advocating to reduce the market to minute by minute. I'm saying 5 minutes is fine, but we need to do other things, you know, to help. Because if our forecast is down to an average every 5 minutes, we get benchmarked from NUC every minute. You can see a disconnect. And if you fail 1 minute, because some of you who have visited the access control room, you know, we have 2 frequency limits we operate to. If you operate 1 minute on any of those frequency limits, our score is negative 700. So it takes you 8 minutes to get back an average of 100%, right? So anyway, again, that tells you the need for flexibility is important, is getting more and more important. And we're trying to see if we could work with NUC to revise that BAL001. We also looking at flexible resources. We're looking at the extended day-ahead market, DER programs. Can we use DER to help control the grid? That wouldn't take, you know, changes to traditional AGC. But again, the point here is the ISO is looking at about 10 different things currently to see how we can meet the flexible capacity needs looking forward. We did look, and this is not out yet, we did look at the 2030 timeframe and beyond. Those ramps going to get pretty big, right? My boss was asking me, can we meet those ramps, you know, ramps greater than 30,000 megawatts or net load below 10,000 megawatts. And we think with the changes, you know, and I mentioned WEIM, extended day-ahead market, the time of use rates, using batteries a little differently, probably new market products, you name it. But we think we would be able to maintain reliability. And again, today we only show curtailments, we only show batteries, but there are like 8 other things that we need to look at And hopefully later on this year, with the work that the resource adequacy work group, they're doing, we're going to combine and come up with a proposal for this flex capacity moving forward. Next slide, please. Linda, next slide, please. Okay, so net load, right, is defined as load minus wind minus solar. Again, when NERC developed this net load concept, I was part of the group that developed this. We did this way back in 2010, and back then we had very little renewables. So the load concept back then was the load that you saw from the generator terminal, which was in the old days, you know, like the, in our case, like the PG&E, Southern Cal, San Diego, that was the load they controlled to, right? So that didn't change, but now that we have so much batteries on the system, we need to rethink. You know, do we use the load or do we redefine what that load is? Should it be load minus batteries, load minus pump loads? So this is another thing we're going to be thinking of moving forward. Without truck, we're going to have to get NERC to buy in because NERC has this net load defined in the industry. You look at documents, when we say net load, you know, we mean the load from the generator terminals. One more slide, and then we can pause. Slide 23. So slide 23 shows the flexible capacity. So we show the maximum 3-hour ramp, which is, again, you have different flavors, what you actually saw, what you would have seen without batteries, what you would have seen without curtailments, and we showed batteries and curtailments being packetized in the 3-hour ramps, right? And then we look at the most severe single contingency. As I said, we could have a contingency during the 3-hour ramp. Today we use 3.5% of the expected peak load max for that month. This is how we calculate flexible capacity. And again, this is a moving target. It's really difficult to predict what that most severe single contingency is going to be in 2026 or 2027, only because sometimes that most severe single contingency could be, today we use 1 diagonal unit. It could be something other than that. It could be an import. It could be the DC. So that number varies. Again, we cannot predict how much is going to be flowing on the DC at any given time. So we use 1 diagonal as MSSC today, which could be really conservative, you know, especially on a day when we have a lot of imports on the DC. So anyway, this is how we come up with the 3-hour flexible capacity. And I'm going to stop here and see if there are any questions in the queue.
Thanks, Clyde. I'm not seeing any hands or questions in the chat.
Okay, let's move on. So slide 24. So slide 24 shows you the upward 3-hour ramp on the total flexible requirement for 2026. And again, you know, what we did here is we showed the ramps with and without curtailments. And then for 27, 28, we showed the advisory. But again, the takeaway here is the ramps, they are expected to increase. Then, as I mentioned, when I looked at the after beyond 2030 timeframe, and then again, I'm not sure when we're going to put this out, but the ramps beyond that timeframe could be greater than 30,000 megawatts, right? So that's one of the reasons why we're looking at a slew of mitigating measures to reduce that ramp in the future years, right? So the gist or the takeaway from this slide is showing you how that ramp's increasing over the years. And I was really surprised to see, you know, beyond 2030, how huge that ramp's going to be. we're not worried. We think there are a lot of things we can do on the grid to maintain reliability, reduce curtailments, because that's one of the things, my CEO had said to me a while back. He says, the easiest thing to do is curtail renewables, but let's make that the last thing we need to do on the system. So we're looking for any solution. And if any one of you out there on this call have any ideas as to how we could minimize curtailments or how we can maintain reliability, and I think I have mentioned about 8 things there, please shoot the short-term forecasting group. We have a site where you can submit comments. We all is trying to get this right moving forward. So we'd appreciate any input you have, how we can minimize, again, curtailments, how can we utilize batteries differently, how we can, depend on other things on the system, how we can work with NOAA, So anyway, slide 25. So slide 25, and I'm going to step back. Most of you are familiar with the 3 buckets. We had a base, we had a peak, and we had a super peak bucket. Well, that applied when we started this flexible capacity analysis. But back then, we had 12 to 14 hours to go from minimum load on the system to peak demand. So you can use really slow units like something like a ROMP 2 megawatts a minute. They fill in the gaps. So when you committed something in the morning, you could leave it on, and then you could meet that evening ROMP. The other things that we had asked for in the past when we developed this program is we needed resources that could start multiple times during the day, right? So what we had envisioned is during sunrise, when the sun is coming up, we need to shut the units down, and then we couldn't start them back in the evening, right? So when we developed this flexible capacity, we were looking at, I think it was 180 minutes. Somebody could correct me. And then we were looking at units that we can start within, 4 hours in some cases, because again, we tend to see negative prices during the middle of the day on weekends. And to meet the 3-hour round, if you need to start a unit that takes, let's say, 4 hours to start up, you need to start those units up before the ramp starts on evenings. And that will just aggravate your oversupply, make negative prices go more negative. And but anyway, what this slide is really telling you is the diamonds, the red diamonds, is really the peak for that day. So if you look at any given month, so a good month might be, let's say, February. February, it tells you that the peak demand for that day was 27,000, and I have seen the demand for days. So this is the peak demand for the month, right? But if you may see a little over 20,000 megawatts. And again, the 3-hour ramp now for February was 67% of the peak demand for the day, which means we got to ramp up the peak demand in 3 hours. So now you can see the need for fast-moving resources, right? This is why I had mentioned we need to take a second look at the EFC accreditation. But is that really going to give us the fastest unit we need on evenings? Again, we're looking at how much import comes in on the ties to help us meet the 3-hour routes. Because most of you familiar with, well, the batteries can really help. They can ramp really fast. One of the things we've seen with the fast ramping batteries is when they provide regulation service, they cause oscillation if they ramp too fast. So what we do in the EMS is we slow those batteries down, right? We need to still figure out, well, what's the optimum ramp rate that batteries can discharge at to help meet the ramps without causing, things like oscillations on the system, right? So again, we are revising the flexible capacity. We are taking a second look at what could qualify for EFC, and now with the 3-hour ramp, you really need a 3-hour ramp. The previous 3 buckets that we had which was base, peak, and super peak, we may have to change that again moving forward, right? So this plot really tells you how the needs changed on the system, why it is we need fast-moving resources to help us meet those ramps, right? Slide 26. Slide 26, the reason why we showed this is to show how it's not easy to predict net load from one day to the next, right? This is just looking at 7 random days in April last year. I had also looked at 7 consecutive days. It looks pretty much the same, which means, you know, on the vertical axis, that ramp changes. On the horizontal axis, it also changes, right? So it tells you forecasting now it's a challenge, right? And again, you know, I had mentioned load. In the old days, it was easy to forecast load because it was temperature dependent. Today, you got price responsive load, energy efficiency, demand response, rooftop PV, and then the combined heat and power also plays a part, right? Because, well, you know, at least I hear from the combined heat and power developers is they're ahead of the ISO. And if they anticipate the price of energy is going to be low, they just decide to buy that energy off the grid. So now the forecaster is going to predict human behavior in addition to all the other things that they got to incorporate into their models, right? So forecasting load is a challenge, especially in California. And then the rooftop PV, and then 2 years from now, we envision electric vehicles going to be another big variable in predicting or forecasting net load. So this is, again, one of the reasons why we're working with NERC, trying to get them to change one of the standards where we get benchmarked every minute as to how well we control. But that was the reason for this, to show you it's easy, or it's not easy to predict the net load shift from one day to the next. Next slide, please. This was the same day, April 20th, shows you the maximum 3-hour ramp that we saw. And again, this is excluding curtailments, it's excluding the batteries. So if those were online, that ramp would have been a lot greater, pretty close to, I would say, 23,000 megawatts. So next slide, please. This is something we keep track of, looking at the net load. And again, this is, you know, after we curtail, this is looking at actual PI data on the system. The maximum ramp that we saw was below 20,000, and then minimum net load is 273. I don't have a slide to show it, but when we operate on minimum net load around 200, 300 megawatts, you run the risk of not meeting one of the NERC 5 existing standards. And one right there is downward dispatchability. When you operate the gas fleet very low, or the hydro, let's say wind kicks up or solar kicks up, you essentially have nothing to use to back down, right? This is why we're saying here, renewables need to be part of the solution to integrate higher levels of renewables. So renewable resources need to be able to provide essential grid services like voltage control, frequency control, and the flexibility, right? So those are the 3 things that NERC identified as essential grid services. Again, voltage control, frequency control, and flexibility. So flexibility is really important moving forward to make sure we can balance supply and demand. And I had mentioned, you know, like we have roughly 10 to 15,000 megawatts of actual solar production on rooftop PV. In real time, you don't see that. We're not advocating that you need to see that in real time. The only thing that we will advocate is when the flows go from the distribution to the transmission, we need to know that flow because it's essentially that becomes an injection point into the grid. Some of you may know the way we calculate load is looking at the interchange plus the internal gen. So the gen that goes from distribution rooftop PV when it feeds back into the transmission, it's like a tie in a way. So we need to calculate the load every 4 seconds. So again, we're not advocating we need 4-second data from rooftop PV. We would only need that when the flow is from distribution to transmission because that impacts our reserve obligation in real time. We need to know that so we could comply, again, with another standard. Next slide. This here is a summary of the flexible capacity needs for 2026. Again, this is a combination of the 3-hour ramp plus the contingency reserve, or 3.5% of the most severe single contingency. This has no curtailments. This has no batteries, right? So again, we're going to be looking to see how to incorporate other things like, EDAM and WEIM and other changes into this. But again, flexible capacity is important. I think my last slide is the next slide. And I did talk about this. This is the new standard that NERC developed last year. And what NERC observed is balancing authorities, they were able to meet the peak capacity on any given day, but they were not able to meet the energy needs every hour towards the peak. So NERC formed this team and said, we need to look at the energy needs and develop this standard. So I was part of this work group, and we developed this standard called BAL 007. And I'm not going to go into all the line items, but basically it's saying when we commit resources starting in, I think it's before the 2026, we need to make sure we have enough flexibility to meet the energy needs every hour. So again, this is another reason why we need to take a second look at the way we do flexible capacity calculations or the methodology moving forward. With that, I think this is my last slide. I'll take any questions before I pass this on to Han.
Okay, we have one hand from Nick Pappas.
Nick.
Hey, Clyde, thanks so much for the presentation. This is Nick Pappas. I'm a consultant, and I'm not super engaged in the flex capacity study, so I apologize if this question is a little bit ignorant, but trying to connect this to some of the conversations in the CPUC, IRP, and RA space. Going back to some of the results you shared back to, for example, on slide 24, so showing the change in ramp over time, and you've alluded to this a bit, but a big part of the Flex Challenge is fast ramping storage has the ability to tackle a lot of this challenge, but just trying to understand the growth here. I think what you've shown so far is net peaks, so net of solar and wind. When you bring storage in, are we seeing sort of a dip in the near term in the sort of residual flex requirement that then bounces back as we get into the 2028 period? Or any insights you can share on just sort of how the kind of contributions of storage net out over time as we think about pace of installation?
Yeah, so let me, if you can go back, I forget what slide it is, but kind of move back. And I think, yeah, can you go back? I think it's either like 24 or 25. Go back again. Again, back. The previous one. One more.
Slide 20, I think.
One more. Might be 19. Or one more. I think is the one before this. This one here. This shows you as battery increases, right? The impact it had on the ramps. And, you know, when we do the forecast, we do see an increase in the ramp. But we know batteries help in real time. The exact extent, you know, is something we need to really get a better handle on. Because today, when I look at battery charging and discharging, I don't see 100% of the capacity, right? We see something closer to 60, 70% of the capacity participate in either charging or discharging. And then they participate also in things like regulation. So unless, I would say, this is just me, not the ISO, I would say unless we have, let's say, a market product that based on speed, batteries can participate in that, we would see a lot more batteries participating in this, let's say, new market product, where they can be paid for speed and not just for capacity. So who knows? We're looking at, as I said, a lot of things, but definitely storage is, or not storage, batteries is a light at the end of the tunnel, you know, at least for me, and I think it's going to help. We just need to figure out how to better utilize storage for the system. And when I say storage, I mean batteries. Because the beauty about batteries is they could provide regular frequency response, which is something that, you know, the first line of defense we have on the system, either in either the charging mode or the generating mode. So that's a really plus for batteries. And they can also, they move so quick, they can help you arrest frequency. So if batteries can inject megawatts into the system in cycles, they can help you arrest frequency, right? So I see a lot of benefits associated with batteries. We're still trying to figure out, you know, the best way to utilize the capability. I don't know if that helped you, Nick, but.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Was someone going to respond?
Oh, go ahead, Nick, and then I can jump in.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, Clyde, I just want to say thank you for pulling this slide up. And yeah, this is really interesting. We'll be eager to see what the 2025 results look like. Just for my understanding, I'm assuming these are averages. I know when we're in sort of system RA space, we talk a lot about the extreme days. In Flex RA, is it a bit more consistent across the month in terms of the ramp, or are there some kind of specific days of concern we need to be thinking about?
One of the things we do, Nick, is when we look at the maximum ramp, like the maximum 3-hour ramp, a lot of times, you know, we look at that ramp, and if that ramp looks out of whack, we look at the second highest ramp and even the third highest ramp. So this is not really the extreme, because when we, as I said, when we look at it, we pick something that's, I wouldn't say like 95% or 97%, but not only time we would pick the absolute peak 3-hour ramp, right? Because again, it goes back to NERC. NERC did not tell us that you got to meet the ramping needs every hour, right? It's okay to fail an hour here and fail an hour there. The only thing that standard really tells you is you should not be failing the same hours every day, because now you have a known problem and you need to fix that.
Got it. Thanks very much for all the input here. Thank you.
And I just wanted to add one piece. I think Clyde did a great job covering all of the different aspects here. The one piece to emphasize, right, as we go through this year's FlexRA study informing the 2026 requirements and then the advisory 27s and 28s, is that the battery resources do get an EFC value from their PMIN to their PMAX. So they are getting that accreditation from the resource perspective right now. We know that how batteries are included in any part of the resource adequacy process, including the FlexRA, are critical, and those are topics that we really touch on within the resource adequacy working group structure. So Nick, it may be good to plug in over there. There's a slide way at the end of the deck when we get to it that does talk a little bit about what's happening over in the Resource Adequacy Working Group. But any of those changes and evolutions will occur over in the Resource Adequacy Working Group outside of this study. So just wanted to point to that.
Oh, one more thing, real quick, Amba. This slide here, those of you who know Tobias, he's the one that created this slide. So credits to him. Okay, any more questions for me, Elena?
No, there's no other hands and no questions in the queue.
Okay, so off to you, Hong. Thank you guys.
We'll go to slide 31. Thanks so much for your presentation, Clyde.
Oh, slide 31 was supposed to be my slide. And it's really, you know, it's what the RA, the Flex RA working group, and what we're doing. And I think we talked about it. We're looking at a lot of different things to see how we can modify the program moving forward to ensure we have, or we can maintain reliability. So we can move on to Hong.
Thank you, this is Hong, and thank you, Clyde, to really get the flex ramp we need. That's lots of knowledge, lots of analysis, lots of data processing. For this section, particularly for our allocation, is a little more mechanic. You said, well, you got a big pie, and then how to allocate it to each of the LRA. So. And we have been doing this for years, and this year we'll keep the same, except we have maybe have one component we need to dealing with next year. So then the please next. This is the big pie. The red is the big pie I'm talking about. And we look at the ramping need is around between around 25,000. And I just got the news is our the solar production reached the 21,000 megawatts on April 25th. That means when solar goes down, we need some flexible capacity to go to compensate the solar goes down. So it's around 21,000 to reach the maximum. So here the red bar is around 25. We have some load, some wind. So roughly is in this range. And the yellow bar is what the flex ramp, all these from last year. So you can see we do see some increase. So this is reflecting the increase of the solar generation, solar penetration to the ISO grid. And so this is the starting point for me to how to get the this big bar to allocate to each of RA, each and every RA. Next, please. So before this, we need to see the we need to see how much solar contribution and how much load contribution for that net load requirement. Generally, we have seen the solar contribution goes up and up. And if you want to see how much go up, you can see the last year's presentation or last year's paper or documentation. And the load is getting lower and lower. Wind is always the 1% plus 1%. So it's the kind of swing. That's the wind. Then the that's the general trend. Solar goes up, so you can see the load is the relatively is the how much is contributed by load is went down gradually. Next, please. So we define this category-based peak and the super peak flexibility, and we in this we as a client already pointed out in the slide 29, or then we more need the faster ramping, and the base is of not really in this 3-hour ramp in need. So this definition is kind of grandpa definition, is really maybe old. And so next, please. And this is trying to define a season of the summer, winter. You can see the in winter, the peak is higher than the need. In peak is higher than the in the summer. So this is definition for the different categories. Since category, the concept of the category is kind of maybe outdated, so this is not really carry too much information, except the peak flexibility is for winter and in the summer. Look at the last next to last column is kind of stable. That 68.55 is pretty much the same in the last year, so we have not seen the increase of the peak need in that sense in the categories. Next, please. Yeah, so yeah, here is the just talking what I said before, and the this year is 55 in the 2026, and the last year was 54 and 68 versus 66, so it's kind of stable. Next. So when we talk about, then we can see the for this next 2026, the overall, that's the big bar. We slice the big pie into different categories. You slice the pie into 3 different categories, small bars, and then you can see the yellow is peak is still the largest component. The red is always 5%. So we need more, and more of the unit can meet this yellow and the red bar, the peak and the super peak categories. Next, please. Thank you. Here is how much CPUC is going to allocate it, because CPUC is the biggest, they're going to biggest take of this flexibility. They have PG&E, SDG, SCE, and some others. So they generally is, over years, they counted for 95-ish of the total flexibility. The rest of small LSE consider only about 5%. So here I'd like to stop for any questions.
There are no questions at this time.
Okay, thank you. Next, please. So this is interesting, is kind of showing the muscle offer of the muscle offer hours for a different month. Generally, this when this 3-hour ramping starting time, that's critical. Is the solar goes down, then the faster starting from that 3 hours, starting generally from hour 15 to hour 17, and the shape is summer goes a little late, and winter and spring is a little earlier. So that's a general trend, makes sense. And maybe some years is 1 hour early, some years 1 hour late. But the general trend is like this U shape. Then if we are going to use the factor, generally the starting time of starting 15, hour 15, 16, to see how what's the new component may need to come into the allocation for next year, for future, not this year's study, but for next year's study. Then next. So this is the most offer obligation. That's the kind of categorical description of what we're seeing. And it's all 15 for spring, and the summer is all 17 to 21st. So next. Yeah, so this is some nuances presented for this year is the battery. And as I said before, the hour 15 generally is starting the 3-hour ramp needs. So the battery generally.
I think we're losing your audio.
Oops. This is the new component we may need to consider for next year's study is a battery. Battery is growing bigger and bigger. So the impact is we need to really take into consideration, and Clyde and Amber has mentioned it in early presentation, but here is may need to come into play for allocation, because before the hour 15, the battery generally charging, and then that's the contribution to the load ramp. And for most of the month, starting the hour 15 to hour 17, 18, that 3 hours, then gradually going to discharge. So when solar goes down, what we need is the battery discharging, not the charging. So if you're charging, you exacerbate, the battery exacerbated the 3-hour ramp needs. So we need to allocate this battery charging activity to your requirements. So this year we most of the month is kind of flat. We don't know the pattern what would it be, and if it's still showing the charging still existed in the when the ramping started, we need discharging, still charging, and so then we needed to do something for the allocation of the battery activity, but not this year. The reason we cannot do this year is we don't have the really information to mapping each resources to the LRA. Even they may operate by different SCIDs, but it's not mapping to LRA. So we may include that information in our survey next year. So we'll see how it goes. And also, we welcome the feedback from the market participants, how the battery is really going to affect all the study, and also here is how we're really doing the allocation is fair and reasonable. Okay, so and welcome any feedback and comments. So next. So this is the verb summation of what I have described, and the flex hours and the moon hours, and the peak category is stable weight, and so So I think that's my last slide. And if no more question, I'll transfer to Amber. Amber, we're going to cover AAH. Thank you.
Thank you, Hong. There are no hands in the queue and there are no questions in the chat. Thank you for your presentation. We're going to go to the next slide with Amber Motley.
Hi, everybody. This is the last part of the deck, so we're almost there. One of the things that we do alongside the analysis for the FlexRA processes, the requirement, the allocation, and the must offers is the availability assessment hours, or what we call AAH. This is not linked to FlexRA and the FlexRA process, but because it uses the same data, which I'll get into in a second, we put that within this study and allow comment opportunity from market participants on the AAH hours as we analyze and update them annually. Next slide. So just a little bit of background is that the AAH is designed to determine the hours of greatest need to maximize the effectiveness of the availability incentive structure. So those AAH hours, as we go through, form the must offer obligation for that system RA, and is maintained as part of the reliability service initiative within phase 1. If anything ever changed with this, because this is a tariff requirement in 49 of the tariff, it would be within that RA working group that we talked about earlier as well. Next slide. So overall, the methodology stayed the same of how we've analyzed the AAH. We're using the CEC IPER data, accounting for the daylight savings time shift. And we're looking by hour, by month of all 3 forward years, the 2026 years, all the way through the 2028 years. AAH is focused on the top 5% of those load hours, looking at both the actual demand that we see, as well as the forecast information coming from the CEC. In this methodology, I will point, it aligns with the other parts of the study. They do not contain the actual information nor the forecast information, contain battery charging for load for those market participating resources or the in front of the meter resources that are there. I will note that for 2026, and we'll get into the data in a second, we are proposing one change for winter season for the AAH hours to align in different areas. Next slide. So the ISO is proposing for the 2026 season. We had this as our advisory information for 2026 in last year's study to align the winter and the spring season. So overall, the winter season historically has been hour ending 17 through 21. We continue to see the shift in both the forecast as well as the actual hours of that time period moving later into that 18 to 22 period. So the big change for AAH as we go through this year is the draft study's recommendation to align the winter and the spring seasons to hour ending 18 through 22. The other thing that we've noted, and you can see this on the graph, this would be the first time it's ended up in the top 5% of load hours in the graph, is there is hour ending 8 on here. So most of the time, all of the hours that we look at with top 5% of load hours is really focused in what we had an evening peak. CAISO BAA historically is an evening peaking system. As different variables have changed on the system, we are starting to see dual peaking on the CAISO BAA, and you see that represented in the 2024 actual frequency, where you see January, March, April, and December all have an instance where the top 5% of the load hours for that month ended up in hour ending 8. The CAISO is going to continue to monitor the hour ending 8 time period in the forecast. We have a slide that we'll go to next that looks at top 10% of load hours, just to give some more indication to stakeholders of where that hour ending 8 is starting to show up across the top 10% look versus a top 5% look. But we do see it also in the frequency in the forward years. You don't see it in 2026 is CEC's IPER forecast and the top 5% of the load hours, but you do start seeing it more prevalently, even in the top 5% of load hours of the CEC forecast when we get into the 2028 season. Next slide. With some of the changes that we have, one, the winter moving from a 17 through 21 to 18 to 22, in addition to hour ending 8, and some of that morning peak information starting to show up. We wanted to provide the stakeholders with a little bit more information as we analyzed it, really looking at the top 10% of the hours to monitor some of these changes that are happening in the load across the board. I think there's a few observations. There's a lot of numbers on here. We know there's a lot of data here, but we thought it would be helpful for you guys to visualize it as we kind of go through. I'm going to walk through the morning peak time period first. You can kind of see that morning peak time period in the 2024 actuals of the top 10% on the left side, and then the 2026 IPER forecast on the right side. So you see that in the actuals, some of those showed up in top 5%, but when you look at top 10%, you see hour ending 9 and 10 also there, and you see the frequency of hour ending 8 be higher. In the 2026 forecast space, you do start seeing when you get to top 10% of load hours for hour ending 8, especially for January, February, September, and October, some values show up, 3s, 4s, 1s. So we're starting to see that. The other thing that we're looking at is the shift of that winter time season from 17 through 21 to 18 through 22. Kind of looking at the frequency hits that you have in each one of those hours. And you are starting to see for that winter season, those values shift from 17 into that 22 space, really with the actuals of 2024, you see it in there. You also see it pretty prevalently in that forecasting space where they're there as well. The other thing that we're monitoring over time is right now, if you dug into the tariff, that it will note to you that AAH, the availability assessment hours that we perform, is a 5-hour continuous time period that is selected. We are starting to see maybe that bifurcation of a dual peaking system. So we will need to monitor those changes in this area and just highlight those within the results as we go forward. We don't expect any changes right now for this study as it relates to that dual peaking, but it is something we want to highlight to the stakeholders. Next slide. This goes into some of the shapes that are there. I'm not going to walk through all of these shapes. They're in the background materials kind of to help highlight the different periods, but the one slide I will walk through is that winter time period. I think on each one of these graphs, you have the forecasted information. So the 2026 CEC IPER forecast is in that solid blue line. The 2027 CEC IPER forecast is in that dashed blue line. And then we also put 3 years of actuals in here. Again, these actuals do not include battery charging for the market participating resources, but you have 2022, 2023, and 2024, which is that red highlighted information. One of the things that you see, again, aligns with that recommended shift for the winter season to the 18 to 22 time period. You see both in the actuals as well as that forecast information, especially when you get into that 27, 28 time period, that the forecast information really shifts those top 5% of load hours in the winter, where you bring hour ending 22 up more than where you see hour ending 17. So with that data, this data, as well as the supporting data from the previous slides of top 10% of loads, as well as top 5% of loads, that's where the recommendation of the shift for 2026 of the winter months has come from. With that, I will skip to slide 51. I'll show a summer month time period just to kind of give a different perspective as well. As you go through each one of the actuals, of course, when you see some of the different actuals there for the summer months, it does depend on temperature as well as the forecast information. But those 17 through 21 hours for summer right now still are holding overall. you still see those higher load hours a little bit earlier in that summertime period due to the heavy amount of air conditioning load that is on the system. We'll continue to watch them. I think you've seen in historical trends, all of the actuals move back a little bit to that area of time where the sun isn't there as the behind the meter solar capacity has grown and other dynamics have changed on the demand side of the equation. But for right now, the summer seasons, both in the 2026 years as well as the advisories of 27 and 28 will remain at our ending 17 through 21. With that, let's skip to slide 53 and we will go over the draft recommendation for 2026. So that draft recommendation for 2026 has summer season at 17 through 21 and both the winter and the spring seasons that are denoted by the months underneath from 18 through 22. Go to the next slide. This is the advisory recommendations for 27 and 28. So the advisory recommendations for 27 and 28 remain the same as the 2026 estimate at this point in time, but we do want to highlight that we are continuing to monitor those morning peak hours, our ending 8, especially during the non-summer months. And if any changes were to occur, you would see them in those winter and spring seasons as it related to our ending 8. And we'll probably talk through that more in the next studies as they come forward. And I see Patrick's hand up, so I will pause for a question.
Can we go to Patrick Cunningham, please?
Hello,
Patrick, go ahead.
Patrick Cunningham. This is Patrick Cunningham of the Public Advocate's Office. Just a quick clarification. On slide 48 that showed like the spread of hours of highest load, is that net load or gross load?
This is gross load. That's a great quote. That is a great quantification. So these are all, AAH is all defined, and I don't call it gross load served, but this is the demand, not the net demand.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Good question. All right, I do see one question in chat as well from Nick, and his question: would it be possible to share the data set of the underlying slides of 47 through 48? As you go into the paper, Nick, you will see links to those data sets. All of this data came from the publicly posted file from the CEC's IPER forecast. So that you can be able to run similar analysis or change analysis, go to top 15% of load hours or top 20% of load hours, whatever you would like to look at. So that is in the links of the paper that is posted. All right, with that, I will go to slide 55 and kind of wrap us up as we go through the different studies. We will this year have BPM updates that are needed. We will wait to make these BPM updates until after the feedback comes in from the stakeholders on the changes that are there. The one changes that I do want to highlight is as you look at the FlexRA study, you see October in month has changed, and in its recommendation of where it sits within the different categories, October is now lumped with that period of October through February in the FlexRA side. In AAH, like we just discussed, you do see changes of that winter time period to align with spring, which has 18 through 22 and was historically 17 through 21. Following all of the stakeholder feedbacks as we get towards the final posting, you would see updates to the reliability requirements in section 7, and then there will be opportunity to comment there as well. Next slide. And then Elena, do you want to take this slide or would you like me to take this one?
Yeah, I could take this slide. So for our next steps, I do want to also highlight here that this is a shorter timeline than our typical 2 weeks. We do have the comments due on May 5th for this, so you can the comment template is broken out for the flexible capacity needs assessment and for the AAH and each section of the presentation today. So if you can submit those comments by end of day May 5th, that would be greatly appreciated. And we're going to publish the final flexible capacity needs assessment and AAH for 2026 on May 16th. And you can, if you have any questions about this, you can also email us at isostakeholderaffairs@CAISO.com. Next slide. Any other questions here? Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so here we've started including this in an effort to help you stay engaged with the various ISO initiatives. Here's a list of key events occurring for this week. Next slide. And just some other links that links and deadlines and trainings, we've included that all here. Next slide. And here we wanted to let you know about our Energy Matters blog. We posted a new blog by President and CEO Elliot Mainzer that explains how the grid operator is working with its state and industry partners to help bend the energy cost curve by removing barriers from the bulk electric system that impede progress and smooth operations. So this piece focuses on the ISO's enhanced interconnection process, more coordinated and strategic transmission and procurement planning, and expanded electricity markets that have already saved participants and their customers nearly $7 billion, with more savings on the way after the launch of EDM next spring. So you can check out all those, you can check out that blog and others there, and you can sign up to get that. Anytime a new blog comes out, you can get the email. So thank you for your participation today. Thank you for joining the discussion, and we hope you have a great day.
This event has concluded. Thank you for using Event Services. You may now disconnect.